Hello, good evening, and welcome. I'm Simon Bestwick.
And I'm Gemma Files, and this, of course, is
Oh,
No Darkness, but Ours.
in our first episode, we talked to Lynda E Rucker about the influence of Robert Aickman, the role of horror fiction, the folk horror film Ynys Men, and began to discuss the power of the ambiguous endings that we find in so many of her stories. Tonight, we move on to the double-edged nature of being part of a group, the hazards of social media, and some of the fears that populate Lynda's work.
The idea of withholding the resolution, I think, is a very antithetical to the way that things are right now, and the way that people want things to be. It almost seems brave because it's a little perverse. It's because you're setting yourself up for a lot of people to be like, what the shit?
Yeah.
She did it again and again and again. Ah! It's like, the first thing I'm going to tell you is that I'm not going to tell you what the point of this all was.
Again, a very Lynchian thing.
Yeah, super Lynchian and super real, super,
Yeah, it'll throw some people off, but at the same time, anyone who actually knows and appreciates your work would probably be disappointed if you didn't do it.
Yep.
You did give them a nice easy solution to it all. But,
yeah. But also, it sort of gives you the illusion that the story just goes on and on.
Yeah.
Which, to me, is a fascinating idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Almost in that C.S. Lewis kind of, and then the real story began.
Right.
The story that never ends. Da, 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 da.
Or like if you've seen Artemis 81, that kind of very long section where Howell Bennett's finds himself in this weird city, kind of after sort of narrowly escaping death, and it's kind of what the fuck is real here and what the fuck isn't? What the hell's going on? It's that whole sort of like, what the hell is reality right now? I don't know. It's great. I was going to ask you about something you're saying in the story notes of the the notes to one of the stories. You cite loss of self as one of the worst things that can happen as far as you're concerned, and that's a much more insidious danger than simply like something, Matt Axman coming up and whacking your head off with a hatchet or whatever, because it can happen almost without you knowing, without you realizing. And it can happen in the context of a relationship with somebody, or in the community that you grow up in, or a community that you become a part of. So do you feel it's necessary to maintain a certain distance from other people to avoid that? And how do you distinguish between something that's like a threat, a threat to your own identity, your own integrity, and something that's, an opportunity to kind of, to grow and change? Because
right.
those things often mean challenging.
Yeah. That's a good question. I mean, I think if I could answer that last question, I would probably be rich. I mean, I think that's kind of the I mean, that's one of the $1 million questions, isn't it? Is how do you know the difference in those things? But to go back to the earlier part of the question, though, I mean, yes and no. I think I mean, obviously anyone who knows me socially knows that I really enjoy going to the reason my voice sounds so funny right now is because I was at the UK Ghost Story Festival and I talked too much and I no longer have a voice. So, I mean, I enjoy, spending time. I wouldn't say, I have really close relationships with people. There are writers that are very dear to me. Of course, writers groups can be very fruitful. I mean, you had the Inklings and the Lost Generation, and but I do think there is a danger in identifying too much with quote unquote any community. I think that I think there's a danger that people all start sounding like each other instead of themselves. And you know, I mean, there's a lot of reasons I think social media can be really bad for writers, but I mean, one of the reasons is because everybody just kind of sounds the same on social media, you know.
Yeah.
Everybody uses the same slang, everybody.
Yeah, well,
You know,
that's
I'm
true.
like, for God's sakes, you're writers, you know, like come up with something more original, you know. And I, you know, I also kind of have a little bit of the Groucho Marx about me, where I don't want to be part of a club that would have me as a member. But so I mean, I definitely wouldn't say that I keep myself apart from people at all, because people are really important to me. But I think that you always have to maintain your independence of thought. And I think that's what's important, you know, and ideally you surround yourself with people that will value that about you.
Yes.
As opposed to, you know, so I think that's kind of the key.
The way that you think, the oddities, the eccentricities,
yes,
and the differences
exactly.
rather than the similarities.
Yes, exactly. Because I know that's what I find interesting about people and about stories that I read is the ways that we're different. And, you know, when I can look at them and just think, my God, I would have never thought of doing that, or I would have never had that idea, or I never looked at it that way, you know. So, and to go back to the identity and opportunity for growth, that's really hard to know. I mean, I think some of it is just age and experience and instinct.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Like I said, I think
I agree with that completely. Sometimes I think, you know, there's a certain amount of your 100,000 hours that go into, you know, imitating people you love, that go into finding your own voice, that go into sharpening that voice, but then also deranging it. And saying, okay, so how have I changed from this point in my life to this point in my life? And that's something, again, that, you know, has become really obvious to me as I get older. You know, I'm going through menopause right now, and it's so fun. Loving it. In some ways, you know, at least now I you know, when the thought occurs to me that I'm like, oh yeah, I am a very different generation than some of these people. That they think is fascinating to me, but, you know, very alien, and, you know, because of X, 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 and X. But I think that at some point you have to realize that you will never think again the way that you thought at one point.
Yeah.
Because you know too much.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I had a very long period when I when I felt that I'd kind of lost a certain youthful idealism or clarity, as I sort of thought, and I was desperately trying to get that back. And eventually, of course, I had to realize, no, you can't. You can't. You've moved on from that. You're not that person anymore. You're not going to be able to write. You're not going to write that stuff anymore. Move on to the next thing. And it's annoying because I'm thinking, like, certainly in the 90s when I started out, I was doing stuff that could often be quite a bit tub thumpy politically, you know, sort of like this, that. And I kind of thinking if I was writing like that now, you know, I'd probably, well, I'd probably be quite very much the same as quite a lot of other writers now. I think I was a bit more atypical back then. So I don't know if there's part of it is like, oh, everyone else is doing this stuff now. Well, I'm not going to do it now, you know.
Well, again, you know, I think, do you want to say things directly, or do you want to say things sort of filtered through your fiction, filtered through your life, and then filtered through your fiction? I think a lot of, you know, a lot of commentary kind of falls into two camps, right? And the first one is, I know what's wrong and I know how to fix it.
Yeah.
And then once you're above a certain age, you're like, yeah, I think I know what's wrong. I do not think that I know how to fix it.
Yeah.
So now I'm just going to have to figure out how to live with it.
Yeah, yeah, I agree
until
with
that's
that.
not an option anymore.
I saw a graph once which was like, in your teens or 20s, I could fix everything if I could fix all the world's problems if they'd only listen to me. And then,
Yeah.
oh, it's more complicated than I thought. Oh, it's really, everything's fucked, blah, blah. And then you get to sort of 60 or so, I could solve all the world's problems if only people would bloody listen to me.
Yeah, God damn it. It's like,
You kids, get
nobody
off my
listens
lawn.
to me except for the people at Fox who don't listen to me at all. They just tell me what I want to hear, like they're taking it out of my brain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It can be, and social media is one of those things you can find yourself surrounding yourself with people who are like-minded, which is great.
Right.
But yeah, it can mean that you end up shutting out people who maybe aren't saying what you want to hear, but who do have something to say. I may well have been guilty of that. I put my hands up. But at the same time, sometimes there is this thing of like, there was one guy I blocked because it was politics. Basically, we keep on going over the same points every time, and it was like he just could not seem to. I was like, so look, you believe that X happened because of Y. I believe it happened because of Z. You're completely incapable of, sort of.
We're going to have to agree to disagree,
Yeah.
or we have to just say, let's stop having this conversation.
I couldn't even post once. I'd post something slightly political, and I'd get like this 2,000 word screed, and it was kind of like, there's only so many times you can sort of argue that the grass is green and the sky is blue, and it's just because I've fucking had enough of this shit, and fine, I just go, what? Sorry, I'm hitting the block button. I just, I don't wish the guy had any harm, but I just, social media can be difficult enough without feeling like I'm whacking my head into a brick wall
every time you open it up.
Every day,
So here's a question. Social media can definitely be an echo chamber. I actually think that fiction can also be an echo chamber if you restrict yourself to only a certain type of fiction. So here's my question. What nonfiction are you reading? What interests you outside of?
I love to read travel writers.
Hey.
Yeah. One of my I love Paul Theroux. I love Dervla Murphy. She was an Irish Irish travel writer that just died recently at the age of 90.
Wow.
But traveled like right up into her early 80s. Rode her bike from Ireland to India in the 1960s, and she was amazing. I'm reading a biography of George Orwell. I like to read biographies.
Interesting.
I've, of course, like now I'm actually drawing a blank now. I'm like, I never read anything. When someone asks you something directly, I've never read a book.
Book? What?
Yeah, exactly. I've got on my to read stack, I've got some Robert McFarland. He kind of writes English nature writing, landscape.
Yeah.
Folk,
yeah.
Not folk horror, but it has that feeling about it.
Folklore.
Did you realize about the kind of my was it not called Underworld or something? It was like something about the kind of the
yeah, he wrote that.
Kind of,
yeah.
He wrote that. Yeah.
Underland.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
That it.
I have that on my I have that on my Audible account. I haven't gotten to it yet, but yeah, I'm with you there. I've gone back to archaeology recently.
Oh yeah. No, I love history. I mean, I read medieval history. I really like. So yeah, I read a fair bit of nonfiction. I'm reading. I read Salman Rushdie's book of essays, The Language of Truth, which is really a great thing to read as a writer. It makes you so excited about writing fiction. And that's the other thing, is that fiction can be an echo chamber. And I think one of the biggest mistakes I see is writers who only read one type of fiction, and you really do need to read widely. You really, really. There are not a lot of things that I'm prescriptive about. There are a lot of things where I'm like, this is what works for me. This is what I think for me. But that's one thing I would be prescriptive about. You have to read widely.
What's the Rushdie book called again?
What's the what?
Rushdie?
The Language of Truth.
Language of Truth. My short-term memory's all going. I'm just making a note of that.
Yes, me too. Got my notebook.
Yeah.
Are you writing all the time, or are you kind of writing deadline to deadline?
I wish I was writing all the time, but I tend to write more deadline to deadline. But I don't really like living that way. I would prefer, not just because it's really stressful, but because I would prefer for writing to be, something I'm happiest when I'm doing it consistently. And I mean, Simon knows he's always like nudging me, have you done your words today? And
I've actually done a little I've actually photoshopped Rosie the Riveter typewriter with Linda's face on and the sucker, so Mr. T style. Sent quite a lot.
Yes.
Maybe you should start sending that to me.
Yeah.
God knows. Doing a lot of drawing, not a lot of writing. Yeah. But
that's I mean, your drawings are pretty cool as well. So
thank you.
So picking up from the last question about loss of self, because I just couldn't notice that quite a lot of the story, especially in Now It's Dark, like in The Dying Season, like in Knots, and to an extent the story The Vestige, they show people, mostly women, but in the case of The Vestige, a man, all caught in kind of like unhealthy or kind of controlling relationships and trying to escape from them, sometimes successfully and sometimes not. Was there anything in particular that brought that theme to the fore in your collection?
I mean, it's always been a subject. I think relationships are just such a, it's such a great fertile topic. I mean, I just can't write enough about it. There's so much you can do with it. But I did actually find when I was putting this collection together, I was like, wow, there are quite a few stories about women in these terrible relationships. And I was trying to sort of like separate them throughout the collection because I didn't want you to read one after the other, but I think that's a really central fear. And I think, I mean, although, as you say, I do have a few men that are experiencing that, I think that's such a, I think it's a real fear, especially for women, because we're just kind of socialized to subsume ourselves in somebody else. And I actually remember when I was younger, because I was always like, oh, I don't want to like end up leading this certain kind of life. And I remember thinking that I was just always sort of afraid that like I would wake up in the suburbs with 3 children in a minivan, and I would sort of be like, what came over me, You
ask yourself, well, how did I get here?
Yeah, exactly. And I remember like when I actually got to the point where it was like, I was the age where that just wasn't going to happen. It was such a relief, it was like, and so, I think to some extent, some of the stories do come out of that fear of that loss of self.
Yeah.
But I also just, I love writing about fucked up relationships. It's just a really interesting thing to write about. I think there's a lot there, and I think too, when you're writing about horror that comes from within, there's so much emotion and angst and pain that you can draw out from that.
It's fascinating the way that I think particularly in Western culture, I've said before that we have so few words for what is a really wide range of experience.
Yeah.
When we're talking about love.
Yeah.
And
yes.
There is this idea of subsuming yourself into the other person. There is this idea of man and wife is one flesh. There is this idea that you should be, all up in each other's business and thinking each other's thoughts. And I I think we set ourselves up to fail in that particular way. And then it becomes this weird gender essentialist bullshit, where, you get guys telling themselves very strange things about how men are supposed to be, and women telling themselves equally strange things about how women are supposed to be. And that is a strip mine of horror.
It is.
It's like it's the best thing in the world and it's the worst thing in the world.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Much like the writing, when it goes well, you can't beat it. When it's going badly, oh, fuck.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
like a bad relationship.
There is. I mean, there's no end to the way that two people can destroy one another, and I find that fascinating.
Yes. Yeah, and that they can be doing it out of what they think is love.
Yeah,
It's like I will complete this person. I will fix this person. Yes. I will, make this person the best them they can be.
Yes.
And to say that as someone who's living outside of the other person is just such insane hubris.
Yeah.
The whole husband and wife as one flesh. I just ended up. I had a big mental flash of that Brian Yuzna film, Society, or possibly something that David Cronenberg would have a time with.
The Shunt.
Yes.
Well, son, I guess I am an asshole.
My God, it's been so many years since I've watched that. I need to. I need to see that again. Just God, screaming Mad George at his finest. That one.
Yeah. I'm so happy to see young people discovering those crazier films from the 80s, the stuff that just fell in a hole when it first came out, and you'd see it for like a second and then it would just disappear off the map. But now people like Haley Piper, like Society. That's the
she's always sharing memes of that, but it could have come that could have come straight out of
Shunt Orgy.
Yes.
Absolutely.
You say it like it's a bad thing. I think somebody did once say that, a load of the stuff that, Lovecraft was so phobic about, we'd all be like, yeah, that's miscegenation, seafood.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, that's good.
Sexual sort of heterodoptic.
Degeneration.
Why are you running screaming in terror? We're enjoying ourselves. Shut up and have some scampi. Lynda E Rucker's new collection, Now It's Dark, is out now from Swan River Press, price €40. Swan River also now have her previous collection, You'll Know When You Get There, available in paperback, and her first collection, The Moon Will Look Strange, is available from Amazon. You'll find links to all of those in the description below. We hope you enjoyed tonight's episode. If you did, please smash that like button, share and subscribe. If you'd like to support No Darkness But Ours, you can make a donation via our Ko-Fi page, or alternatively you can subscribe to the podcast or join our Patreon, either of which will get you exclusive access to content including deep dive discussions of folk horror classics In the Earth and Penda's Fen. Again, all the relevant links are in the description below. That's all we have time for this week, but be sure to join us in our next episode when we'll be talking to Lynda about the creative process, the idea of fiction as dreaming with your eyes open, and the importance of grounding the weird in the mundane. We'll also hear about Lynda's love of experimental film and her thoughts on the short story versus the novel as a vehicle for strange fiction. But until then, I have been Simon Bestwick.
And I, as usual, am Gemma Files. And this has been No Darkness But Ours.
Rucker that sucker.